Welcome to all of our guests. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today, our board of directors, our members, and our invited guests to today's presentation, America in the Next 90 Days, presented by President and Managing Partner of the Stagwell Group, Mark Penn, who is waving at you now. Hello, Mark. Thank you. And Chief Executive Officer of the Harris Poll, John Gerzema. Now, I know I've seen John present before, and I don't know if he's on camera yet. So we're really thrilled to have you both. As a reminder for everybody who's joining us today, we are recording today's presentation and we will make this available to you. During our presentation today, please send us your questions by using the chat box feature. And now, before we introduce our esteemed guest speakers, it's my pleasure to introduce our Chamber's Board Chair and Group Vice President of M&T Bank, who arranged for our speakers today, Lowell Yoder. Lowell?
Thanks, TG. First of all, I want to thank Mark and John for agreeing to present today. And I think we all know that the Chamber's mission is to accelerate the success of our members. And one of the ways that we accelerate our members' success is providing the right information at the right time from the right experts. And that's why we bring you this presentation today. And I will say, so Mark and John, I've heard a number of occasions, and I can think of no better time, and a perfect title in my mind, the next 90 days. There's so much that's going to happen. And I was reading an article yesterday. It was entitled "The 7 Ways Great Leaders See the Future Differently." I don't know if anybody's ever seen that, but it was titled May 2014, and I think the author is Bill Murphy. But the number one thing on those 7, I won't tell you all 7 was, but number 1 is they understand that the unthinkable will happen often. And I said, wow, that was in 2014, and I think the unthinkable has happened. And I think with the help of our speakers today, we can put some thought, maybe rationalize a little bit about all of these variables that have happened, and try to make some sense of it as business owners and folks that need to address what's happening in the world today. So with that, I think I will pass this over to Leslie, who will moderate and also introduce more formally the speakers today. So Leslie, please.
Thanks, Lowell. I'm going to try and keep it quick because I also had a chance to preview the presentation, and I think we want to get to what Mark and John have to tell us. So Mark Penn is the president and managing partner of the Stagwell Group and chairman of the Harris Poll. He has spent 40 years in advertising, marketing research, public relations, polling, and consulting, which sounds to me like the very beginning of that institution when you were in kindergarten, Mark. So before founding the Stagwell Group, Mark served as the executive vice president and chief strategy officer at a little company called Microsoft. He worked on the company's core strategic issues like blending data analytics with creativity to help set the company on a new course. And of course, we know Microsoft is now purchasing one of our own local companies in the big news in the Business Week this week. He's written 2 best-selling books and earned his bachelor's degree from Harvard and attended Columbia Law School. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
John Gerzema is the Chief Executive Officer of the Harris Poll. He's widely recognized as a pioneer in using data to identify social change and help companies then anticipate and adapt to those new trends and demands. He is also a New York Times best-selling author and has appeared on many publications lists. He serves as chairman of the National Kidney Foundation, as a board advisor to the UN Foundation's Girls Up campaign, the University of the People, and is a distinguished fellow with the Athena Center for Leadership at Barnard. His bio notes that I was given didn't mention that he is a graduate of 2 Big Ten universities, that one which shall not be named in Columbus, Ohio, and Northwestern. So go Wildcats, and welcome, John. And we will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all very much. At Microsoft, when I was at Microsoft, I used to give a presentation called Data, Not Anecdotes. And, I'd start off this presentation by saying, well, who do you really trust for information? Really your significant others and your kids, or the market research department. So invariably 2/3 of the people would, at least at the beginning of the presentation, say that they, of course, trusted their significant other and their kids over the market research department. So the point of the presentation really always was to get people to believe a little bit more in kind of using data, and in this case, we're going to look at survey research, and interpreting it as a way of kind of understanding kind of what's going on out there. And so we're going to give you some data today, and not that many anecdotes, and see what you think. So John, next, I guess, roll. So I think first I'm going to give you a couple of summary ideas of kind of what's happening before we delve into the data. And that is that, we've come a long way through this crisis at this point. And in general, there have been two emotions, I think, that most people have often at the same time. And one is fear. And if those remember the movie Psycho, they'll remember that particular scene well. And the other is desire. And so generally we'll see in the poll that fear has been winning out over desire. But people have those two emotions that they wrestle with, in dealing with the crisis. Next. And there's also kind of been two ways of dealing with the crisis, physically, right? One group sort of in general, their guy doesn't shave, turns on the Xbox, orders the Dominoes and kind of rolls in that way. And the other person gets up and goes through their routine and gets ready for the Zoom meetings and is kind of business as usual. So, and I think you'll see that very much in the data. And again, you probably go through the people in your own office, and you can pick out who's getting through how. Next. And then, the surprising thing, I mean, the actual danger of the virus for older people is approximately 300 times that of younger people. And yet the fear levels throughout the crisis are exactly the same. And young people fear it the same, if not more, despite the relative, differences in the numbers. Next. And companies who, I think before that you'd always read survey after survey about how nobody trusts anybody in companies, and big business is not trusted. And this has really been an exercise in that, well, big business, they're pretty good. They delivered on time. They got the packages done. They ran the plants. They supplied the food. They had the grocery stores. So it actually, I think, gives, business a kind of a large boost in terms of image, that when the chips were down, business was able to deliver for people, even in dramatically changed circumstances. Next. And then I always put the companies in three different pots here in terms of how they've been affected. Some companies got more customers than they ever expected. Domino's did, obviously Purell, you couldn't find it for a long time. P&G's household products, people drink more orange juice and milk because they think it improves their immune system. And so you see some companies actually did better, and they're going to be, they made it just fine through the crisis, and they're going to say, how do I hold on to all these new customers? And then you look at the companies in between that weren't connected to the virus, but were affected by the general economic decline. I'm sure most of the companies, on this call were probably in this middle bucket. So I always say about our company is a great white shark took a huge bite out of our revenue. And then everyone adapted to kind of the changed circumstances, but you're going with the economy, and you went down with the economy and are coming back with the economy. And then the third group is really those people directly affected by the virus because people wouldn't use their product out of safety concern. And those principally, I think, have been the airlines, hotels, transportation, and densely packed as opposed to outside restaurants. And those are going to those not only have to say to customers that, hey, you can come back, but B, they have to convince them that you can come back safely. And that is quite difficult, for these groups of companies in the absence of a vaccine. Next. So this is kind of the first chart of data, and John, who runs the Harris poll, has just run an incredible series of data from really day one of this crisis in March, on a weekly and sometimes even bi-weekly, kind of really probing consumers and creating a data set. Like one week we didn't put the table of contents in it, and the CDC called and said, "Where's the table of contents?" So we know that it is perhaps the premier data set of public attitudes through the crisis that John, using the same techniques that he uses for companies and market research, really applied here, I think, magnificently. And so what we had a basic fear question here, which is, I fear I could die as a result of contracting the virus. And what happened here is that fears were originally fairly low. Most people thought this is crazy. People, running and buying everything at the stores. Then fear levels went up as the virus, cases started to, increase from 3,000 to 100,000. But then fear levels pretty much stayed up there, regardless of whether or not the virus went, considerably higher or was on a downtrend for a bunch of weeks. Now, I guess technically it may have peaked at 60% believing that, and it's come down, I guess, from a peak of 60 to 51, but it is stubbornly holding pretty much at about half the country that continues to believe. And I'm not commenting whether it's right or wrong. I'm just commenting that there has been a kind of a curtain of fear that has descended across the country and that stays there. And I know underneath it, it's not really varied much by age. Next. And so if you look at some of the particulars, right, of the curtain of fear of dying is just one aspect of that. Fear of losing their job, there was a little bit of an uptick in the last wave or two. You can see some upticks, but generally you're in the, fear of leaving home for essential errands. That's at about 76%. Right, up to, so you have 3/4 of people fearing leaving their own home in order to do essential errands. And even though there's not a ventilator shortage, you still have 68% who fear a ventilator shortage. So there's a lot of fear out there. Next. Right, and then do you think which is going to have the bigger impact? Well, for most people, they do say that the economic impact is bigger. 61%, and again, there's been a range of impacts, across, as you'd say, everything from income to having to support family members to losing, some income. But 61% say that it's the economic impact that has been bigger than the impact of the virus itself. Next. Do you think your income in 2020 will be lower? Lower, 30%. Higher is going to be about 22%, and the same 48%. Well, again, I think that's at least half the glass is undisturbed, and you're looking at about a third who've been seriously disrupted economically, and about 33% of additional sources of income. More typically, if a lot of retail, younger people were able to get a lot of frontline jobs, because in that sense they did have less to worry about, and so they popped up in those jobs. Next. And then emotions are mixed in terms of how people feel about this. I think it's good that appreciative, thankful, compassionate, those have been the key emotions, followed by angry and cabin fever, fear at 42. So I think a lot of people are just appreciative that they were able to make it through, keep themselves safe, have family members who were safe. And I think that's a great emotion. It's balanced by this notion of anger, fear, loneliness, especially if you got stuck, isolated from your family or, in a one-room apartment kind of thing. Next. And this one really illustrates pretty well about the dichotomy of how people, coped with this. So while working from home, are you more likely to skip a few days of showering? 48%. Take a shower daily? 52%. Roll out of bed and start working? 51%. Maintain your morning routine and then work? 49%. Wear pajamas and sweatpants, which, by the way, pajamas and sweatpants sales, one of those companies in that first bin, 51%, and get properly dressed, 49%, and therefore kind of clothing for work has really plummeted as a result of that. Half the people who are working don't really dress for work anymore, and even though people said that they are working more. But that shows you the two ways, more or less, that people cope. Next. And this chart is really kind of a super important chart because it breaks out the individual activities, and it says once the government provides information that the spread of the virus is flattening, how long will it take you to do each of the following? Immediately, up to 3 months, up to 6 months, a year or longer. And so by breaking down each activity, you see that people are fairly amenable to going back to the office. Interestingly, though, people don't want to go back to the office. It's the one activity they're not really as enthusiastic about, but they recognize that it's one of the safer places to go. But that's why, in contrast to going out to dinner, which is not as safe, inside you can see a lot of pent-up demand for going out to dinner because that's second. Staying in a hotel has moved up to, you can see 31% would do it soon. Going to a gym, again, so you see a lot of preferences that people are making. That shows to me that people see the office as safer, even though it's not their first choice for what they want to do, and they want to go out to dinner, stay in a hotel, go to a gym. Public transport is next. And if you look all the way at the end, flying on a plane, taking a cruise, and going to a sporting event, those are things where people think, oh my God, I'm really afraid of those things, right? In contrast, the willingness to do that soon is really in half or less. And so you see particularly the problems planes are having in terms of getting a restoration of some personal travel, but really almost zero business travel. You can see movies and casinos also problematic, but a little bit higher. How much would you miss each of the following during the virus? Well, obviously friends and families, number one, and the number one reason that people break all of the codes or do it is that they have to see their friends and their family. I mean, we are a social species, and then followed next by dining out at a restaurant, and that's where you can see very few people say they miss going to school or work. Although, I guess going to gym is 44, but not everybody goes to the gym. Next. Major purchases, again, we track this early and then we look at it later, and you can see, in wave 30, the higher percentages that want to go on vacation, buy new clothes, buy gifts for friends and family. In general, that there's pent-up demand, it's so that one day there'll be revenge spending here. People will want to go out once this is over, and really binge a bit. Next. And are things changing? Certainly as you go through it, what do they expect to be different? I mean, again, travel and vacations, social activities. I mean, they don't expect really many changes in family life, eating habits, health insurance, or health care. I think it's, again, travel, vacation, social activity. Next. So once the pandemic is over, you think it will be very different. Again, if you can just look at this in terms of what is the new normal? Will things change? I think it's very hard. I don't put as much stock in these questions because it's hard for people to predict how they're going to operate, in the future, and how much change they will really make in their actions and their behaviors. This is the percent saying mostly the same. It suggests that people see significant long-term changes here. Next. And again, thinking ahead after the summer ends and outside temperatures will become colder, how comfortable would you be to do each of the following activities? Socialize with friends and family. I think that's where you're seeing a return. Going to the hair salon next, shopping at a mall, eat at a restaurant, going to a gym. This seem to be the activities that people want to do and are willing to kind of, work on the fringes here, wear masks or have social distancing, or, this is where the rules start to get fuzzy. This is where fear and desire kind of meets, head on. Next. Which is following, which we're going to go to inside this winter. Again, people are starting to go back to family, particularly family members' homes, friends' homes, some basic stores and restaurants. Again, you can see bars are at the bottom of the list, movie theaters. So when you look at that and you see, bars and movie theaters are kind of in a separate category over there with planes and cruises. Next. And again, more than 3/4 are concerned others will relax. So how concerned are you about others? I think everybody's always concerned about others. It's part of the whole mystery of this thing as well. Okay, will people start to relax? Yes, they will. Next. So John, let me turn it over to you for maybe this group. John, are you muted? No, John.
John, you're still muted.
Is he still muted? Yeah, he's still muted.
The webcam says you're muted.
Mark, this is Alexis. Maybe you can take this next section, John, if you could just advance the slide.
John, until you find your mute button, we will kind of roll with this. So overall, now let's take a little bit at some of the politics. If you kind of look, this is the Harvard Caps Harris poll that we do kind of on a monthly basis. If you were to go back here, the president had been consistently month after month improving his ratings until he got to 49% in April. That was actually kind of a good range in which he could win the presidential race up around that level. And then, he stepped back from managing the virus, at least publicly, and his ratings plummeted, really down to 43, and now they've come back slightly. They've come back to 46, as I think then he got back into what, at least publicly, being more active about the virus than he was, and as the virus came back and the economy also came back somewhat. Next. And then, obviously, I don't know how even 31% see the country on the right track. We asked this basic question: you think the country's on the right track or the wrong track? And obviously, we're dealing with a pandemic and the economic effects of a pandemic. And so 62% say it's on the wrong track. But Americans have said the country's on a wrong track for a long time. If you look at those charts, we were just getting up to more and more people. Till this broke out, we were beginning to get America saying that the country was on the right track, and we'd come over the long term here from as low as 29. We were just up to 41, and people were beginning to feel comfortable, and so much for that. Next. And then on the economy, as they were becoming somewhat more comfortable about the country, they became way more comfortable about the economy, and had by 51-36 thought the economy was on the right track. And then, of course, that plummeted and reversed. and it sunk to 65.27, and now we're at 58.35. And you can see that public opinion mirrors kind of economic developments pretty well. Next. Most important issues. Again, the reason I think you've seen the presidential horse race open up from what was a tie to being set back as many as 10 or 12 points was that the president's numbers on the virus plummeted. And the virus is the most important, issue. It's the virus stupid would be kind of the theme of this campaign. And the economy is second. Healthcare is up there, race relations, civil disorder, immigration, environment and climate change. Those are smaller issues, but you look by and large, the virus in which the president's still at something of a deficit, and the economy in which the president has a relative strength to the opponents, it's really clearly quite big. And then if you ask people, well, if I just said between these three things, what do I want them tackling? The virus. Please stop the virus. Next. And then, if you take a look at favorability of political groups, generally we add the first two blue boxes here and get a favorable rating. And on this, the military tends to do the best. People like the CDC. Interestingly, the police, which obviously has been under a great deal of controversy, they've actually gone up the last 2 months. They were at 60. They are now at 68%. Barack Obama really sits as the kind of very well-liked former president. I remember when Bill Clinton occupied this position. Black Lives Matter is at 52.39. They were at 55. They've come down a few points. So a majority of people approve of Black Lives Matter and approve of the police, which is symbolic or representative of the fact that people want, they want great policing. They don't really want police defunded in any way. And then, Biden's at 50-44, not bad. Trump is at 41-54. He's got a significant personal deficit. Hillary Clinton is sunk below Donald Trump, and Pelosi is below Trump. And people use Twitter but don't seem to like it much, at least the general public. And China and Antifa, of course, are at the bottom of the list when it comes to likability. Next. All right, so if you kind of delve into the election, a lot of people are going to vote. Right now we have the horse race at 49-42. And I think that's a pretty good representation of where it is, which is to say that Biden has an edge. It's not insurmountable by Trump, but if Trump doesn't kind of have some successful debates here and move 3 or 4 points, you'd have to, if I were, had to put something down on the wager, since I'm driven by data, not anecdotes, I'd have to go with the data. Once this gets to 2 or 3 points, if it does, then I think you see something, then I think you see a race that could go either way. But still, this is a race in which the incumbent is running like the challenger. He's out there every day, and the challenger is running like an incumbent. He is doing more of a rose basement strategy. Next. They don't know who's going to win more than anybody else. And they do seem to think when you ask them about the neighbors that there's stronger Trump support out there than we're getting in the polls, because when you ask them about the neighbors, then it's tied. 37-37. Next. And again, if you do head-to-heads on the who's better at fixing the economy, well, Trump wins that by 7. Remember, if you're winning, and Trump is losing the horse race by 7, so in the way I would read things, that means really Trump has about a 14-point edge on the economy because he's overcoming the vote deficit. And then clearly bringing the country together, that's a core Biden asset. solving problems of race and policing. Biden asked that. Establishing law and order. It's about the same as the horse race. Getting us through the virus, a little bit of a weakness for the president at 43.57, and handling relations with China, about the same as the horse race. And you know, with all this talk about character, and people's stands on the issues really do matter. Next. All right. We'll see if John has your mute button now. You're still muted, John. All right. Well, all right, I'll keep rolling. I can't hear you. All right, more than, and I think they expect the presidential debates to focus somewhat on the virus. I mean, you know, it gets amazingly, I mean, part of it is that there's a limit now to what elected officials can do. They've kind of set out a framework. They've invested in a vaccine. They have various, you know, each state has orders in place working through various phases. But they definitely want to continue to hear from the presidential candidates, you know, about the virus and how they're going to tackle this and what they're going to do to, you know, bring America back. Next. Again, I think this just, you know, again, it's just, again, the virus affects young people the least, but they're the most interested in the virus. So I think that's part of the paradox of the curtain of fear that that has occurred here. Next. Is it the most important topic? Again, I think people are split on that, but it will be a, again, older people say no. They're going to be more concerned. Obviously, they're going to be more concerned about the economy than just the virus. Next. Brands and political engagement. All right. Still John, another chance on the mute button, or? Nope. Okay. So, would you rather business, you know, I see a lot of polls that go something like, would you be more likely to buy a product from a company that, you know, took positions on social issues, you know, good positions on social issues? Well, who would say no to a question like that? But is it a realistic question, or are you just eliciting socially desirable responses from people? So I said, well, would you rather a business you buy goods and services from take a public stance on social and political issues, or should businesses largely stay out of it? So I just sort of, and 55% said largely stay out. So I throw up caution flags of people who say, oh yeah, we have to take a stand on this and that. It really depends a lot on your customer base, and I think some of the questions have been kind of leading questions that are a bit overblown. I think this is a fair perspective on it. Next. Do you think business leadership on social and political issues is authentic, or does it follow what is politically correct and helps the bottom line? So, you know, again, this is interesting because then I think a lot of companies don't realize that for most of them, and it's not everyone knows Nike has been successful with its campaign. For most of them, trying to be political comes off as inauthentic and really just, you know, trying to, you know, basically, you know, virtue shout. And so you have to be careful that a lot of what you think you're doing, even when you're sincere in what you're doing, could seem inauthentic. Next. Do you think business leadership on social and political issues has real world impact, or is it limited to helping better position the business in the eyes of stakeholders? Well, again, I think you saw real world impact is at 43. There's a fair degree of skepticism of what businesses do. And do you think business leadership on social and political issues encourage or prevents employees from speaking out and presenting contrasting views? 62% said that. It's an interesting, I hadn't really actually thought of it until till we hit upon this question, because it's an interesting question that if a company goes out that you're working for takes a stand on issues, then somebody who disagrees with that is going to feel super uncomfortable if they're one of your employees. Next. And that gives us to the end of kind of, I think, a pretty good run of data, and I think we're open to taking whatever questions. And I don't know if anybody's figured out John's mute button yet, or if John at this point you want to go in and come back out.
Looks to me like maybe John dialed in again, so maybe we'll get a chance to talk that way.
John? No. Okay.
This is Alexis. John is trying to dial back in for us. So I think maybe if we can start Q&A, hopefully he'll be able to work through the tech issues he's having.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark. That was really interesting. I'm going to lead things off. I also reminded people you can post some questions in the chat, and I will moderate those and see as we go forward. But Mark, early on, you had a slide there about the financial impacts that people are feeling. Things like they've lost income or they're looking for more. And that was a national perspective. Do you have any information on how that varies, perhaps regionally, or is it pretty consistent across the United States?
I don't have it. I don't have it regionally. I mean, obviously, it would vary if you kind of look at it. If you're, you'd expect more impact if you were in the entertainment industry. You'd expect more impact if you were in the tourism. So if you're a big tourism state, and that's an important part of your economy, if you're here, obviously there's no Washington D.C. tourism, at the moment. So I think that there's differential impacts, primarily, because of that sector is hit so disproportionately. I think outside of that sector, and again, I outlined those three different bins. I wouldn't think outside of the loss of DC tourism, I don't think you're seeing any differential impacts. I think government tends to be a cushioning factor here because no matter what, there really weren't government layoffs. There really weren't, paychecks to governments that didn't exist. And in fact, if anything, government had to do more work here during the period and focus on kind of more tasks. And all of a sudden they're hiring, even local government here is hiring contract tracers and all sorts of people to deal with the virus. So I think this area might have had, net loss of tourism and a cushion because of the high level of government expenditures.
Hi, Gigi. Gigi?
Go ahead.
Kenny King.
Yes,
Mark, have you done any research on where people stand with regard to the stimulus package?
Yes. People like stimulus. They like checks, especially to themselves. I think that there is support for a stimulus package. I think the problem solvers stimulus package hits things more or less right, and that's $1.5 trillion. I think the Republican $300 to $600 million is seen as light, and the Democratic $2 trillion is seen as heavy and too laden with expenditures. But I think in general there's pretty strong consensus that they would like to have another round, that it makes sense. And at least for the first time, we're seeing some limits on what they think is reasonable to spend.
Let me just follow up with another question, if you don't mind. It appears to me that obviously this has become a real political issue. And I think in some ways, by not coming to agreement, I think the Democrats think that this will hurt Donald Trump because you can see how it's affecting the stock markets. And the fact that there has been and will probably continue to be a downturn without this stimulus. Any thoughts?
I don't think it's unusual for the political parties to say, hey, I'm not going to do anything, where you have a divided chambers. It's not unusual for those in the legislature to decide that they're better off by doing nothing as opposed to giving what's perceived as a win for the administration. I mean, I think this is short-term thinking. I think people who make a deal when the public's looking for it are winners. And I think it's unfortunate it's taken this turn when there's obviously they think that by holding out for the $2 trillion, they can hurt the president more than compromising, and getting kind of the essential programs flowing. And like I said, it's normally in today's world hard to get Congress to overcome their unwillingness to compromise, their relatively newfound unwillingness to compromise on issues. The 40 days before an election, near impossible. Likelihood, if I were handicapping it, you'll see a deal the week after the election.
Thank you.
Other
Hey, Mark.
questions?
This is Joe McLaughlin. I'm with Sodexo. I noticed that, that from your data, if I got it correct, that young people seem to be very much concerned about COVID. But yet, anecdotally, you're hearing that it's the young people who are not wearing the PPP and not engaging in social distancing. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, that's young people for you.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't right now. I don't have any statistical evidence to say who's complying or who's not, because you could have 90% of young people complying and you could have 10% holding parties, and that 10% could outweigh the 90% of compliance. So if you ask me, probably the phenomenon is that you have outliers among young people, which is to say that that a small percentage of young people do super hazardous activities. But the interesting thing to me is that young people have had very little. When you think of kind of 9/11, World War II, the atomic bomb, generally the young people today who are facing this crisis, it's more or less the first crisis of any dimension that they faced. Like there's no draft or war, and so to see such heightened levels of fear relative to the fact that they're much lower potential trauma as a result, not zero, but much lower, and particularly under 30, is surprising. I would expect the fear curve to be proportional to the science on the fact that the median age of death is 75 or whatever it is, right? Some number that's way up there, and that's just, you don't see that at all. But I agree with you that. But Navin, how do I reconcile what you're saying? There's clearly tremendous amount of concern and fear. You see that. I see that even the people who return, just to use an anecdote, return to my office, it tends to be the senior leadership, and none of the young people come into the open office, right? And so, but on the other hand, some minority of young people could still create a lot of problems.
I think I saw Melissa Childress raise her hand. Melissa, did you have a question?
Well,
Okay.
if not, I do. Mark, hi, Gigi Godwin here. And so I've been reading that that over the history of humans, global pandemics often result in not only terrible global death, but huge social upheaval. And I wondered what your perspective on that is, if there's data that you can tie with that. We've had not only have we had a global pandemic and changes in how everything happens, but we've had huge social, a real change in social issues and discourse around equity issues. And I'm just wondering if you'd like to comment on that.
Well, I mean, I don't know that it was the virus or the pandemic or really the economic. I mean, what I would say for sure is that, 20% unemployment is a recipe for social unrest.
Yes.
Right. And so it's the I think that kind of relationship, and the sooner the economy gets back, I think the sooner I think that you'll see that social unrest will diminish. I mean, that doesn't mean that I think people will continue to carry or get behind some of the causes that I think were raised. They will, and I think that's a productive outcome. But the pure unrest and disorder that you saw, I think should greatly diminish the stronger the economy gets, based on the relationship, between the two. And I was actually kind of, until that broke out, I was amazed at how much order we actually had, despite the kind of economic decline that occurred. But I think I think you're right to say that it's a kind of a really toxic mix to have kind of a pandemic, to have the kind of economic hits that we got, and the kind of social forces that then, again, some of the social forces here are quite good, and some of them destructive. And in a lot of the polling, and as I go through, as I said, people favor the police and they favor Black Lives Matter. And if I had a lot of questions, people said there's a lot of racism in the police, but they did not want to defund the police. In fact, they wanted more funding as much as less funding. What they really want is just great police, right? And I think that the public wants it all. They don't want to be given choices between the two.
Mark, I have another question for you. There was one that said 93% of your respondents said they were likely to vote, and I'm contrasting that with our historic lack of voter participation. I mean, taking aside that people lie to pollsters, is this lining up to be a historic turnout?
Nah,
they say that all the time.
Darn, I was hoping for a different answer. Heck, and I was thinking.
I mean, part of it is too that, look, when we ask people a half hour on politics, a lot of people who aren't going to vote just don't participate in the survey, and that's okay because we need them anyway. But that question is just not an accurate. Of all the various questions that we try to get accurate and we think are accurate, it's just not an accurate read.
Thank you for being honest about that. Angela, you had your hand up.
John, have you made it on? No?
I think I know the answer to this, but just want to make sure. You alluded to some impact of economic disparities. Was there anything geographic? And I assume that the poll data was gathered prior to Ruth Bader Ginsburg's departure, which I think would throw a big monkey wrench into a lot of this. Would you agree?
Well, we're in the field with a poll now. Again, the political situation has remained relatively stable until Trump declined. I didn't really show that chart, but Trump had 51% virus approval, and then he sunk to 41%. And that pretty much explains the basic change that we've seen in the polls. Otherwise, Democrats stayed as Democrats and Republicans stayed as Republicans, and Trump generally has more energy behind the vote. I think the question is is the Supreme Court thing going to give more energy behind the Democratic vote or not? I think it could well give, but you're never going to see, as a kind of we've seen in the past, like when I worked with President Clinton, we had approval ratings in the 70s. We'd get upset if it went below 70, and you don't see that anymore. And then if I didn't work for George Bush, but he had approval ratings in the 20s. And you don't see that with Trump either. He's in the 40s, right? And so the movement that you could possibly have here is not as great as it used to be. It used to be between 20 and 70, and now there's really just this 10% band of movement. So no event suddenly changes everything. Although if there was an event that changed things, at first it wasn't the virus, but then I think the president ending the briefings and kind of turning things over to the governors kind of backfired on them. And I think that's the major change. But in terms of what happens now with the Supreme Court thing, I've got a poll. This was done before that, and I do have a poll coming out in the next couple of days to see what kind of changes occur.
We'd certainly want to see the results of that poll, Mark, because that would be very interesting to see if it moved the needle. What will
Well,
it
as I
mean?
explained, think of a poll as a single frame of a movie, and if I asked you for the
Okay.
plot of the movie based on that, you wouldn't be able to do it. But that's why I think you saw a lot of trend data, and you saw a lot of consistency in the trends here. And the the interesting things that you see in this election that are somewhat different. You certainly see that Trump and the Republicans have a very strong hold on the working class voters, and that's what happened last time and it's held that. But the Democrats continue to do well in the suburbs, which used to be really a Republican stronghold, and that Biden, much more so than Hillary, does well with seniors. Maybe because he, although Hillary was technically a senior too. I mean, there's Biden seems to relate more to seniors, and Trump surprisingly is doing much better with Latinos, right? Which really emerged in the last couple of weeks. So those are the kind of things you got to keep looking at here. If the suburbs and the seniors hold up, the only countervailing trend, the working class by itself is not enough, and the Latino trend countervails it, but Trump has to pull back either the seniors or suburbs, otherwise not likely to succeed.
Well, that's actually a great way to get to another opener question, which is, of course, what we're looking for is what's going to happen in the next 90 days, like the day after the election, or the day after that, or the day after that. A lot of people are saying we won't know. The pundits are saying we might not know who the president is for a little while. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have to start from the premise that most political projections are always wrong. So if everyone says that, like, you're not going to know who the president is on election day,
We will.
Yes, you will, because everybody's anticipated that you won't, and that's been factored in, and so that doesn't happen. But we don't have. See, we have a very elaborate science behind predicting elections based on sample precincts. So we know how to measure, take a random sample of precincts, use the iron law of statistics, and project to within a point or a point and a half, so you can't, what the actual result is going to be. We don't have science behind predicting absentee ballots. So we don't have a way of projecting them in the absence of the actual voter count. So I think especially as judges move things back, look, the truth is, if this race is 7 points, you're going to know who the president is. If the race is 2 or 3 points, then you're not. Right? And so we don't know whether this is a 7-point race now or 2 or 3 point race. Today it's a 7-point race, so I wouldn't worry. You'll know who it is with that kind of difference.
So, Mark, your industry took a hit in 2016 for the using the key precincts and predicting, for citing that, well, Hillary had this in the bag. How has your industry changed and adapted to a more skeptical environment?
Well, I mean, I think I tried to explain that in 2016 it wasn't the polling that was wrong, and it wasn't even the sample precincts were right. I think they picked up pretty early what the states were, but the analysis was bad. And what I explained, when I was doing the job, say in '96 for the president, I had state polls in 26 states. I had national polls. I had to reconcile the national polls with the state polls, against an electoral college model, against a model of the number of people I expected to vote in each state for each candidate. So I had projections of the number of votes. I had projections of the electoral college. I had projections of the popular vote. I had projections of third-party candidates. So I had a pretty complex analytical system. Most people just look at and most analysts seem to just look at a national poll and say, oh, this is going to happen, right? And so I really think that, last time, the fact that so many people focused on an election and no one did a memo that said, oh, well, Trump's likely going to lose, slightly the popular vote, but because there are large third-party candidates too, but he'll win the Electoral College. The only person I saw who correctly predicted 2016 was Kellyanne Conway, and she did this in an interview with Jake Tapper, and she pointed out all of the Midwestern states that she thought Trump was going to win, and Jake Tapper laughed at her the entire interview and basically mocked her as though she was from another planet and was ridiculous, and so someone couldn't even, remember, I always say that you need polls to see what you don't see. You don't really need polls to see what you do see. You already see it. So the one person who actually knew what was going on and should have known as the leader of that campaign was laughed out, hysterically. I had a similar thing, when I was working with Hillary in 2008, and basically the press had decided that Hillary couldn't possibly win New Hampshire, that she won the next day. And so you couldn't possibly say that she would win. She'd win that. So I do think that in any event, my point is that a fulsome analysis of all of the factors, right? I don't see a lot of people doing that, and not a lot of people have the resources to really do that, to make a correct prediction, because people think it's simple, and it's not so simple, right? And I think the more they think it's simple and they can do it, what really did happen in 2016 is a lot of people stopped relying on polling in the campaigns, particularly Hillary's campaign, and they relied purely on data analytics. And those data analytics turned out to be wrong, because groups of activated voters are not necessarily typical of the broad electorate.
Can
Anybody
I
else?
ask one other question?
Oh, go ahead, Angela.
Just one, could you have any sense of what the change in leadership to the post office might have in the way of how people vote, either that or with the COVID-19? How would the voting, the COVID-19 and the changes in leadership in the post office kind of change how we vote? Any sense
Yeah,
to
I mean,
that?
I have no idea about the change of leadership in the post office. It is pretty clear that Democrats right now are sending in more mail ballots, and Republicans are not. Whether Trump intended that to be the case, frequently absentee ballots lean Republican in most places, because they were typically older voters who again, I think when Trump was winning, seniors would have been more likely. So I don't know anything about the change in the leadership. I think the only statistical evidence is that Democrats are putting in more votes by mail. So if that's the case, then Democrats are going to fight for they're going to figure there's an advantage in the votes by mail. And so when I talk about things that are unpredictable, it's like then everything is planned as though that's the case, and then it turns out that they didn't really have an advantage. When after the election, I mean, we'll see. But that's the clearest pattern that we see now, and whether that will catch up then in the next couple of weeks is what remains to be seen. Remember, I do think when it comes to voting, voting was meant to be done in a neutral space with somebody from each party there, rechecking in a private booth, and so the switch to mail-in voting kind of is a trade-off between what makes sense, and 70% of the voters think that mail-in voters make sense, but that same 70% will say we need protections against fraud, mail-in voting, just as we have protections when you go into to vote, and the checks that are made, and the fact that somebody from each party really validates that you're okay to vote, and otherwise challenges your vote. I mean, if anyone's done it, that it's a pretty reasonably elaborate system. So so we'll see. I mean, I think that
I would have the team would have had more of an impact in terms of changing how we vote.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it changes who people vote for. Right?
No, how we vote. Do we go to the poll? Do we mail in?
Yeah, I mean,
environment.
I mean, It could. I mean, I think that a lot of the states aren't prepared. I've always had this theory that like ATM machines should be turned into that. I was like looking for like, okay, where's the secure network that people could go into, have voting booth privacy, have precautions against fraud because pictures are taken, and that you know. And that we have like, I don't know, 500, I don't even know how many we have, but I haven't seen exactly anybody get behind that idea. Because really the holy grail has been internet voting, right? And internet voting, again, has been just sort of discredited, like who's going to believe that? So I've always, I wait for somebody to really kind of, you could, get $100 or you could vote.
Sounds like a great new business line. Gigi, do you want to wrap us up?
I am. Well, first of all, I am going to ask you, Mark Penn and Leslie Weber and Lowell Yoder, and I guess we never got John, but I need Lowell to jump on if you can turn on your screen, because Tricia is going to pin our photos and get a picture so we can put it out there on social media that we were all together today. And Lowell, are you on? Tricia, are you able to pin pictures so that we get Mark and Leslie and me and Lowell if he jumps on?
I'll just do the three of you because I don't see Lowell. So ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, let me just double check. Let's do one more. Gigi, there's glare on your screen. It's hard to get.
The sun just thing. I don't know what just happened.
There you go. Ready? All right. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Good.
Wow. Mark Penn, fabulous. Thank you very much. I'm sure the whole board and everybody's muted, but we are applauding. Thank you very much. Very thought-provoking. We're at a really important time in history, and we're really grateful that you spent your afternoon with us to bring us up to speed on what the next 90 days in America are going to look like. Thank you. And I want to give a shout out to Alexis, who is an incredible partner. Alexis Williams on your team helped prepare us today, and I want to say thank you to Alexis. It takes a team to get all these things done, so thank you very much. Thank you, Leslie, for being an amazing moderator, our Media Pass chair. Leslie's with Johns Hopkins, as you know, and so we're really thrilled to have so much, thought leadership and power here. But Mark Penn, keep us posted. We want to share your information and be well informed by it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a Harvard Caps Harris poll coming out in the next few days, so look for it.
We will.
We're going to look for that. And please express to John our appreciation for his role in getting ready for today and all the data. We're sorry he didn't get on camera. But I have seen you two present before, and you have quite a thing that goes on.
It's the whole thing.
You have a shtick. You have a shtick. Totally, you do. And so I've had the pleasure of that in the past. But again, I want to thank all of our board members. We have a lot of guests that were on, and we want to thank everybody for joining us today. And again, another big round of applause for Mark Penn, the Stagwell Group, and Harris Poll, John Gerzema. Thank you very much. We appreciate it very much. And we look forward to your next presentation.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun, wasn't it, Angela?
It was awesome. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was
Good
really good discussion, wasn't it?
It was a great discussion. I mean, especially for me, is the news and how broad the topics are that you cover.